Morning, everyone. My name is Gary Giannino, and I'm a business banker with Enterprise Bank and Trust. I would like to thank you for joining us today for this cybersecurity briefing and would like to introduce our speaker today. Elizabeth Niedringhaus is President and CEO of Systems Service Enterprises, Inc., a woman-owned small business that was founded by her mother, Suzanne S. Elliott, in 1966. Since the advent of the PC in 1983, SSE has been recognized as a leader in IT and training solutions, most recently in the top 100 of all IT managed service providers worldwide by MSP Mentor. Serving the defense industrial base and financial services sectors since 2009, SSE has a robust network of cybersecurity services practice that is focused on compliance. As an ISO 9001-2015 certified organization, it not only has the technical expertise, but the disciplined processes and business maturity to deliver world-class solutions. With 300 employees, SSE is headquartered in St. Louis with a sister office in Jacksonville, Florida, and is able to serve clients throughout all 50 states. Elizabeth? I think you need to unmute.
I unmuted. Thank you. Sorry. Got us both this time. Gary, thank you so much. Thrilled to be joining you all this morning. Thank you, Stacy, as well. I want to welcome everybody. We are thrilled to be joining you all today. We know that there's a wide audience of folks from many different industries, and thrilled that what we're going to be able to share today are really best practices that will fit and address in cybersecurity in any business. Of course, we're hoping to educate you on emerging threats, but also to provide, and most importantly, really, to provide a framework for you to think about cybersecurity within your business and how you can begin to better protect your organization. So today, and again, I'm Elizabeth Niedringhaus. I'm joined by Greg Thornton and Charlie Shudo. Wanted to give them both just a moment to introduce themselves. They'll be monitoring the chat while I'm talking and hopefully answering your questions. If there are a number of questions that folks are asking that are consistent, we've left time at the end and they'll help me address those questions then. Greg, good morning.
Good morning. My name is Greg Thornton. I am the Vice President of Network and Security Services. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, but ultimately introduce myself. My responsibility at SSE is the daily operations, service delivery, and customer service delivery for all of our clients and internal team. But together with Charlie, put our solution in place for ourselves and for our customers to meet compliance with Nist 800-171 and CMMC as we expect it to be level 3. But thank you all for joining.
All right, great. Thank you. And Charlie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Shudo. I'm VP of Technology and Security here at SSE. I've been here about 13 years. I'm responsible for compliance from a technical perspective, so I'm always the nerd in the room. I'm leading research and development and satisfying controls / practices, whatever you want to call them, depending on your compliance regulation, on a technical level for all of our systems, and that includes, future CMMC, Nist 800-171, and then Nist 800-53, which is used in our classified systems that we're managing for our prime customer. Thanks.
Thank you both. And I know we just threw a lot of acronyms at you. Both of the Nist and the CMMC that Greg and Charlie mentioned are just some of the cybersecurity standards that are out there today, the ones we're most familiar with, but are really kind of the foundation for the best practices we'll be sharing with you. So our syllabus for this morning is one, just to give you a brief bit of background again on SSE, walk you through the history of cybersecurity, again, address emerging threats that are coming out, specifically those that we believe are the ones you need to look out for in 2021 and beyond. We'll share with you a framework for building out a cybersecurity plan across your organization, and then the 4 steps that you can really think about to begin and get started on building out that comprehensive cybersecurity plan. And as I mentioned again, we'll wrap it up with Q&A at the end. So a little bit of background for those of you that might not be familiar with SSE. SSE was actually founded back in 1966 by Susan Elliott. She was determined when the PC first rolled off the production lines in 1983 to grow the business. So clearly at that time, nobody really knew how to use personal computers, and she started as a training organization. That quickly evolved into providing IT services, as many of the large corporations that sent folks to attend the training classes recognized that they wanted to roll these personal computers out across desktops in their organization and needed folks that could help provide that PC support, which quickly grew into IT and network services, and then today really encompasses our cybersecurity practice. And we began developing our expertise in that arena, believe it or not, back in 2009, when we began to manage classified defense programs. As Gary mentioned today, we serve SMBs across multiple industries, of course, those that are regulated for cybersecurity and compliance, but also many other organizations that understand and recognize the importance of cybersecurity to their business. Our secret sauce is our quality management system. We have a deep set of processes that manage all of the work we do that ensure our quality and are really critical when you think about cybersecurity and the detail and rigor in making sure that you're continuously monitoring your environment and reacting to threats. So again, why SSE? Again, I think it's a unique combination as we've been developing this cybersecurity expertise over 11 years. You'll notice this Nist standard I've mentioned here. That again is the foundation of our practice, but the Nist controls that are prescribed are really consistent whether you're looking at healthcare, banking, any of the other defense type businesses. The controls that need to be in place are really very consistent from standard to standard. This happens to be the one that we've built our business around. You couple that cybersecurity expertise with the fact that we've been providing IT services to small and mid-sized businesses for 16 plus years and our ISO certification, and we're really uniquely qualified in the cybersecurity services that we provide to businesses today. So obviously in this field, certifications are super important to SSE. They help make sure that we keep our consultants and technicians aware of the latest threats, the evolving controls as the threats change, and of course the tools and technologies that need to be put in place in order to protect an enterprise. So moving on, again, looking at cybersecurity, kind of taking a step back in order to move forward, looking at the present day threats, and then looking into the future. So this slide is really meant to give you some framework for thinking about cybersecurity. Believe it or not, it's not a new problem. We certainly read about it in the news every day, but it's not a new problem. It's just beginning to be a bigger problem every single day. If you look across the stages and the timeline here on this slide, it may not be obvious to you, but the advances in cybersecurity threats really correlate to the advances in technology. So if you think back to the 1980s when I mentioned that SSE really got started around the advent of the personal computer and networking computers, that created the gateway, those networked computers, for the first time for hackers to really get in and infiltrate an entire enterprise. Then if you think about early 2000, so again, 1998 to 2003, we saw the proliferation of the internet connecting PCs around the world. And of course, this is when cyber threats really began to take off. And now, today, it's what we consider full-blown cyber warfare. Cyberspace has become a digital battleground for nation states and hacktivists. No surprise, given the prior chart, there is exponential growth, not only in what companies are spending to defend themselves from a breach. You'll notice the upward sloping orange arrow here. But there is also exponential growth in what breach costs a company on average, a staggering $8.6 million per breach. And the estimated cost of damages from a breach worldwide is expected to hit $6 trillion in 2021. The economics on both sides of the equation for the hackers and those that are hacked is staggering. Everyone is aware of the breaches to these well-known brands. Again, they were highly publicized in the news media. They clearly account for billions of consumers having their personal data compromised. Equifax alone, there were 150 million consumers affected. That breach cost Equifax, according to Time magazine, over $4 billion. We remember back to the Yahoo breach, that affected 3 billion accounts. So while these are big and well-known companies and affect billions of consumers, what I need everybody on this call today to understand is that no company is immune. When we think about what's been in the news over the last 6 months, and again, the headlines in every news source informed us of the staggering breach that affected somewhere between 18,000 and 300,000 networks. Hackers secretly broke into the SolarWinds software system and added malicious code into the company's software. That software, through their updates, was sent to their customers with that hacked code included in their software. The code then was used to create a backdoor into the customer's information systems, which hackers then used to install even more malware that helped them spy on the companies and government agencies. Hundreds of U.S. tech companies, including Microsoft, were compromised by this elaborate Russian plot. At least 9 government agencies are still trying to figure out which emails and files are in the Russians' hands. This is quite possibly the largest and most sophisticated attack the world has ever seen, and we still don't have all the answers and know the full extent of this breach. On the heels of that breach just a month ago was, of course, the hack by China of Microsoft Exchange servers worldwide. After 4 zero-day attacks exploited on-premise Microsoft Exchange servers, which gave attackers full access to user emails and passwords on the affected servers. It also compromised the administrator privileges on those servers and allowed the hackers to access any connected device to those networks. As of March 9th, it was estimated that 250,000 servers fell victim to these attacks, belonging to somewhere close to 30,000 U.S. companies. Again, we may not know the full extent and the damage from this attack. There may be more to this story as well. Both of these breaches really highlight the critical importance of system maintenance, which is to ensure the consistent and timely patching of your systems. Just last month, as this slide shows, Microsoft released its monthly patches, as it does every month, that addressed 89 different vulnerabilities in their software. 89 in just 1 month. And keep in mind, it's not just Microsoft. Every software that you use in your company releases patches to fix vulnerabilities they found in their software. Around our office, we have a saying, software upgrades are optional, but patches are not. So we're going to stop for a moment. I don't want to just talk at you for the next hour and a half, and have a quick polling question here. Our question is, has your organization completed the latest Microsoft patching update?
So I'm going to go ahead and open up the poll question, and you can respond there. Just give me 1 second to pull it up.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy.
Okay, you should see the poll question now.
Great, thank you. Yep.
Give everyone just a few seconds to answer, and then I'll share the results. And if for some reason you're not seeing the poll question, you can click on those 3 dots on the bottom right and open poll questions, and you should be able to see them. It looks like we've kind of leveled off here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, it looks like it's a little, hard for me there to see the percentages, but close to 23% of you say that you've implemented the latest patches. Again, 20 to 25% that say no or unsure. Again, I just encourage you that this is one of your first lines of defense. So you'll want to make sure you're asking your IT folks if they are regularly updating all software with the patches provided. All right, great, thank you. We'll hop back into the presentation. Let me reshare here. All right, great, thank you. Okay, I was just double checking that it hadn't muted me. Okay. Thank you. So while I mentioned that no business is immune to these cybersecurity attacks, there are several industries that are really under direct attack, as you'll note here. These industries in particular have personally identifiable information, or PII, and intellectual property, IP, which create the opportunity for significant monetary gain for the hacker. This is big business, remember. You'll also note at the bottom right that small and mid-sized business corporations are included in this list. And if you're wondering why, it's because most small businesses, unfortunately, tend to think that they're immune to threats, that the hackers are going out against the bigger companies. But that's exactly the opposite of the truth, which creates the circumstance where small businesses are easy prey for hackers. One of the biggest issues is, of course, most small businesses don't invest the time to train their employees on the latest threats. 91% of cyber attacks start through an email. Would your employees know and recognize a malicious email? Most likely, if you haven't trained them, they wouldn't. And your employees are therefore your weakest link. So remember, you're only as good as your first line of defense. And again, this is another major step to defending your organization, educating your employees. So we're going to pause a moment again, and I'll turn it over to you, Stacy. Our second polling question is, does your organization currently train your employees on cybersecurity? Yes, no, or unsure? Do you want to say?
You should see the second question now. Just give another second or two to fill that out, and then I'll share the results.
All right, again, it looks like somewhere around 32% of you do provide training. Again, that's 70% that don't. I can't encourage you more, and we will to provide training, but we have some links to free training at the end of the session we'll share with you. But there is also great software that's available that can help you not only train your employees, but actually test them by spoofing fake malicious emails to see if they catch them, which is one of the best ways to really reinforce the training. Okay, we'll hop back into the presentation then. All right, give me a second to reshare. Here we go. All right, so the bottom line to wrap up this section of our presentation this morning, it is clear there is no doubt there's an increasing number of threats with increasing sophistication, which leads to an increasing amount of data compromise, which in turn increases what companies are spending to protect themselves. And of course, those in regulated industries find themselves working to operate and manage under increasing controls, all while the U.S. has a well-documented talent shortage when it comes to cybersecurity. In fact, new research from a national labor firm reveals that the U.S. has less than half of the cybersecurity folks needed to fill the ever-intensifying demand. You really have to stop and ask yourself, is your company prepared? If you're leery, you're in the right place, the rest of the presentation will really help focus on the framework to help you get going. Before we hop into that, though, however, we have our third question. Just given some of the statistics we shared, we're curious, has your organization experienced a ransomware, breach, or other type of cyber attack? I'm going to give you a moment to respond once it's up there. All right. Again, give me a moment here to see the actual results. So it looks like 20% of you have said yes, 16% no, 8 or unsure, and 56% didn't respond. I think that's probably fairly consistent with some of the statistics we've seen. However, of course, those of you that are unsure, hopefully some of the guidance that we're sharing today, again, may shed some light. And with that, we'll hop back into the presentation. All right, great. So moving on, again, what we want to focus here are on the 6 cybersecurity threats that we believe you need to really think about defending yourself in 2021 and beyond. So what's interesting to note is how much half of these threats we're going to share with you unfortunately relate directly to COVID. So just when you thought with all the vaccines available we were turning a corner, think again. What I'm calling the COVID hangover number 1 from a cybersecurity perspective is working from home. Every employee who went home is obviously created a broader attack vector for these hackers. Some companies are allowing their employees to use home computers. Most homes do not have the rigorous security controls that you'd have in place in a company, and many employees are taking shortcuts when they're at home using instant messaging or personal email that, again, do not have the same security controls. Remote work has increased the average cost of a data breach by over $135,000. We're going to talk about some of these controls again when we go and lay out the framework for you to think about cybersecurity across your organization. But this really drives the need for thinking about real-time threat protection and access controls. The second COVID hangover is really phishing scams, and this again drives the need for employee training and awareness. You may remember back to the all too popular Nigerian prince scam that had money he had to put in the bank in the United States, and he'd be willing to share some of that with you if you would help him. All that kind of scam is really shifting all towards COVID. Again, the social engineering that's preying on folks' fears related to COVID. So you will see more and more of the scams and the phishing attempts being focused on COVID, whether it's the vaccines, stimulus payments, or surge of new infections. And yes, unfortunately, those cell phones that we all know and love are no longer free from phishing. You may not have heard the term smishing, but SMS phishing is on the rise. So again, a high need to educate and train your employees. The third COVID hangover is the fact that there was a 50% increase in cloud usage with everybody moving out of the office and working from home. Unfortunately, most companies consider functionality first when evaluating cloud software solutions. They think of performance second, and security is last on the list. Cloud providers secure their underlying infrastructure, but customers are responsible for securing the applications and the databases that sit on the cloud provider's infrastructure. And this is where the weakness lies. So again, it drives the need when we think about controls in your organization to consider risk management and data that you're putting out into the cloud, and really to do your due diligence and work with cloud provider. Number 4, we'll continue to see growth in ransomware. 1 in 5 businesses, so that goes back directly to the 20% that we just saw in the poll, report being victims of ransomware. The U.S. ranks highest at 18.2% worldwide of attacks, according to Symantec. Your only way to recover from a ransomware attack is for a solid backup and disaster recovery solution, which again is one of the controls we'll talk to in a bit. Now to some of the more emerging threats, the Internet of Things. So these are all the devices that are being used across companies, in cars that we drive, in our homes, that connect to the web to measure and monitor and run these day-to-day processes. Attacks to those devices tripled in the first half of 2019 alone. We have to think of mobile devices when we think of the Internet of Things, and 1 in 36 mobile devices have high-risk apps installed on them. So again, this drives us back, and we'll share these controls, but to the need to think about mobile device management and, again, access control. And last on the list, but again, a place where we continue to think that there will be growing attacks, is that SolarWinds attack will not be a first of its kind, or the last of its kind, I should say. We'll continue to see a rise in the abuse of system administration controls that become more and more dangerous as the adversaries get inside our networks and deploy viruses and other malware. So again, we'll talk to these in the controls you need to think about across your company, but it really drives the need for access control, multi-factor authentication, and strong password and patching policies. Okay, so moving into this framework to think about cybersecurity across any company. I guess the key thing, and that one of the key points to make here, is that there is no silver bullet. With all of those frightening statistics in mind, what we want you to know is that it takes a layered approach. What we have graphically displayed here is the framework of controls. So this is really actually I should say the family of controls. So these are 17 families or domains that you need to think about in your cybersecurity plan. It is critical to think of these families because it's not just one access control. Actually, within access control, there's 20 different controls an organization should think about in order to protect their infrastructure. You'll note that I've listed Nist and the Center for Internet Security, CIS. There's also CISA. My message here should be clear. No matter where your organization is on the spectrum of implementing a cybersecurity plan, there are frameworks that exist. You do not need to invent this from scratch inside your corporation. You need to really pick a framework and then get started. But all of the frameworks have these same 17 different families. And again, I'm going to walk you through each one and the questions you should be asking yourself and inside your organization to get a sense of where you stand and where you should focus. One thing to keep in mind is, of course, this isn't stagnant. These controls are ever-changing just as new technologies emerge. And the key message here when you think about some of those targeted industries that I mentioned and heavily regulated industries, we see a real trend, which is that new and additional controls are being developed and rolled out all the time. In the defense sector, for example, a control that the Nist 800-171 standard that all defense contractors were supposed to comply with back in 2017, they're now mandating that every defense contractor complete a self-assessment and submit a score to the government on an online website. They've also implemented a new cybersecurity maturity model, CMMC, which you heard Greg and Charlie mention, that will require that every defense contractor get audited every 3 years by a third party, that they're meeting all 130 controls that are defined by CMMC. We note in healthcare that the HIPAA was amended to protect PII and implemented penalties. This is, again, we're seeing a trend towards more significant and greater penalties for non-compliance. High-tech was also amended, in this case, to consider if a company had been appropriately using security best practices to protect protected health information, or PHI. And last but not least, in the financial services sector, there's, of course, new rules proposed that require banks and service providers of banks to provide rapid notification of significant security incidents. So again, the key takeaway here is while we'll talk about these controls today and give you the questions you need to be asking yourself, it's an evergreen process that you need to think about, as there will be new and additional controls, more and more rigor to compliance, and greater penalties. So hopping into these 17 controls, the first, no surprise, based on what I shared earlier, is awareness and training. So the key questions to ask yourself is, how often do you provide that cybersecurity training, and are you confident your employees would recognize a malicious email? Again, they are your first line of defense. Next, access control. Again, no surprise given what I've spoken to earlier. But the key question really to ask yourself is, who has access to information across your company? You really want to think about limiting access to the information that an employee needs to do their job and nothing else. That is called the least privilege principle. You'll also, of course, want to make sure that your firewall is configured adequately and the firmware is up to date. Identification and authentication. Can you identify all the users on your network? Do you have them validate their identity? Do you have a password policy that enforces frequency, meaning every 30, 90 days you force employees to change passwords and you enforce password complexity? In addition, a password today alone is not enough. You require multi-factor authentication into your systems. If you think about assets and the configuration management of those assets, you need to ask yourself, do you have standard hardware and software configurations? Can you track those changes to those configurations? Are the security controls you have in place monitored at relevant intervals based on criticality? I can tell you this is one of the places we spend the most time. Continuous monitoring is critically important to your ongoing cybersecurity posture. System maintenance. Again, no surprise given what I shared before, but are you consistently applying all third-party software patches? Do you know that antivirus and real-time threat protection are running on all your workstations and servers? One of the places that I think companies don't think about that often is media protection. Do you know what information is being copied onto your network if you think of flash drives that employees bring in? Do you know what information they may be taking out of your network on those flash drives? Do you allow removable media like flash drives? I can tell you we don't allow those on our computers. Do you destroy old media when PCs or servers hit their end of life and destroy those hard drives before you dispose of them? What kind of physical protection do you have in place? Do you have an alarm on your office? Would you know if a guest entered your facility? Do you have your servers locked up in either a storage cabinet or a room? Do you maintain audit logs of physical access to those systems so you know who's accessed what system and when? How protected are you from external forces like tornadoes and hurricanes? Backup and data recovery, again, your biggest defense against ransomware. I can't tell you the look on clients' faces when we're called in after a ransomware attack. We look at their backups and we tell them that their backups cannot be, are not good, that the data on the backup is not able to be recovered. It's a look of significant distress I hate to see on any business owner's face. Your best line of defense against ransomware is to back up your data consistently on-premise, in the cloud, and make sure you have a disaster recovery plan in place. And I can tell you, you don't want to test it for the first time when you're having a problem. We recommend frequent testing of your DR plan, at least annually, to know that it would work in the event of a disaster. Communication protection. This is another big area that, again, I don't know that companies think as much about as they should. You need to think about the fact that you've logically separated your systems that are publicly accessible, so meaning internet-facing applications are segregated from the rest of your company's servers and data. Again, do you allow mobile devices to have access to your network? More and more companies have software with apps that get deployed on to their employees' personal devices. Do you have control over those devices? What if an employee lost their mobile phone? They now have, whoever's hand that falls in has the keys into your corporate network. Could you wipe that phone if you needed to, if that was lost or stolen? Do your employees connect to your network remotely via secure virtual private network? Is your data encrypted on hard drives and in email? Do you have web filtering software? So the software that restricts what websites employees are allowed to visit. Do you have session management software, meaning that employees just can't stay logged in endlessly, which again opens up that gateway for hackers. So session management software, that's hard to say, allows you to force the shutdown of those computers on a frequent basis. Computers should never be online longer than 24 hours. System and information integrity. Are you monitoring inbound and outbound traffic for attacks? This is commonly known as intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, so IDS and IPS software. Would you know if malicious code was introduced onto your network? When you think about email, and again, the threats that come in, the stat I believe I mentioned earlier was that 94, it's either 91 or 94% of breaches come through an email. So do you have spam protection on your email that's filtering out as many of those malicious emails as possible before they get into your employee's inbox? Do you have sandboxing software? Do you have endpoint protection software? So now when you think more holistically and think about risk management, which I'm sure you do across your business, but you really need to think about it in relation to IT and cybersecurity. The starting point is really, have you identified what critical information, whether it's PII, intellectual property, that exists on your network? Have you identified where your biggest potential vulnerabilities, where they are on your network, besides, of course, your employees? Have you assessed the impact a breach would have to your company in order to guide your work to increase the security of your organization? Audit and accountability. Do you have system information and event management software that's regularly reviewing the logs and identifying out-of-bounds circumstances and bringing them to your attention? Do you regularly audit your infrastructure system logs? Are the logs restricted to a very limited few personnel with the appropriate credentials? Do you have an incident response policy? So again, you don't want to be thinking through at the moment you've been breached what you're going to do. Having a very well-documented plan, what you're going to do if you suspect or if you know you've been breached. And again, just like the disaster recovery plan, you don't want to be trying this, don't want to be figuring this out in the heat of the battle. You not only want to have it well documented, but you want to test your plan. And again, we recommend at least annually testing that incident response plan. And finally, security assessment. Do you have a documented information system security plan? So a place where all of these controls are well documented into policies and procedures. If yes, how often do you revisit that given the evolving nature of threats? As we've seen here, the threats constantly evolve with advances in technology. If gaps exist, so you've selected a framework and you're working towards that, it's critically important to document planned actions and milestones to address the security holes you're trying to fill. And the key thing is developing those POAM items, again, planned actions or milestones, so that you can hold yourself and your organization accountable to meeting deadlines. So now we'll hop into our fourth question, and this is our final polling question. What is the status of your organization's cybersecurity plan? The choices are we have a strong one, it needs to be updated, or we haven't started yet. So we'll give it a second for that polling question to pop up here.
Give everyone just another second, and I'll close that out.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stacy. Right, so again, significant number of you said no answer here. 7% of the two that responded feel like they have a strong one, and about 35% have said they either need an update or haven't started yet. I think this is one of the things that we find, unless you're in a heavily regulated industry, most companies have not developed a robust security plan, and that's one of the things that we hope you'll take away today, and that we're going to give you the framework in which to start thinking about building one. All right, great. Thank you so much. Let me hop back into the presentation. All right. So now, moving on into our insights and best practices. Keep in mind these best practices that we're going to share are based on our 11 years of experience building out and protecting, controlling, and monitoring not only our own data, but our clients' data. And many of these same best practices you can find on CISA's website, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Again, we'll provide you that link at the end of the presentation. But hopping right into our best practices and our insights, first and foremost, when you think of this, I think all too many times companies think of cybersecurity and they just think of the IT tools. I need a firewall. I need antivirus. I need real-time threat protection. But what they fail to do is properly plan and think about the people that need to be involved, the process, and the IT itself. So first, starting with the people, you need to really get leadership involved. A cybersecurity initiative has to be driven from the top. You must consider a framework that you want to follow. Again, there is no need for somebody to go out and reinvent the wheel. There are frameworks out there. We suggest you identify the framework you feel is most appropriate for your business, and then measure yourself against that framework to get started. In our experience, it takes a multidisciplinary team to really create the system security plan and continue the ongoing maintenance and safety, security delivery. So IT clearly needs to be involved. Facilities needs to be involved when you think about the physical protection. HR needs to be involved in terms of thinking about training employees and documenting that training. Risk management needs to be involved. Compliance. So when you build out the policies and procedures, who's going to keep those up to date and audit yourself against those? Obviously, security, and often a PMO, the project management organization, who once all those plan of actions and milestones are built, can oversee their implementation. This is also a good place to question whether or not you have the appropriate cybersecurity expertise in-house or need to look at a third party to help you. So next, moving on to processes. So again, once you've developed this framework or selected the framework that you're going to follow, we really recommend the planning take a risk-driven approach. So again, where are the vulnerabilities? Where is the critical data? And use those to prioritize your planning and process development. But then you'll want to make sure you develop consistent policies. So think about that policy structure up front, the overview, the purpose, the scope, identifying key roles and responsibilities, documenting the policy itself, procedures associated with following that policy, and of course, collecting and maintaining all the associated documents to any policy. Just to give you a sense, inside our own organization, our access control policy is about 55 pages long when you consider that that covers 20 different controls and all of the procedures and associated documents with it. So this is not a small task. The other key thing from a process perspective is to think about how you can continuously monitor your security posture. Are you following your policies? Are the controls working? Are you documenting that those controls are working and collecting that evidence so you can inspect what you expect? And of course, as I mentioned on the people side, this needs to be driven top down. You need to make sure that you have the management reports and key performance indicators that are both meaningful and measurable in order to be able to guide and allow the leadership to be aware of the security posture at all times. Finally now, moving to the IT side of it, which again we know most companies tend to think about first, but probably should be last. And that is that outdated hardware and software is a significant risk to any company and can be very costly to replace. So again, once you've identified that framework, think about a gap assessment to figure out exactly where you stand, where those holes are, or the gaps, and build a roadmap, again, largely based on that risk-based approach. From there, we highly recommend you question your system configurations. So about 20 of the various controls can simply be met by managing your network through your Active Directory structure and making sure you have the appropriate group policies in place. So, for example, password policy is driven by your group policies, and you can, once you create that, you can enforce that throughout your entire enterprise. Again, we would recommend consider, do we have the expertise in-house or should we outsource this component? And last but not least are the tools that you need to fortify your defenses. So again, depending on the framework and the risk-based approach you've taken, you'll need to evaluate the various tools that may be missing from your enterprise to protect yourself. When you're evaluating those tools, we think it's key to consider not only the performance, so going out and looking at the benchmark studies, looking at the cost per performance, right? We recognize that small businesses may not be able to afford the endpoint protection that a large enterprise would, but we will tell you there is very solid software for every size business, and you just need to be able to balance that performance and cost, as well as the capability you're looking for from those tools. 3 capabilities you'll want to add to your list that we learned by the School of Hard Knocks are, 1, how easily is it to monitor those software tools? 2, do they provide the reports you need and to be able to do your continuous monitoring and evidence collection? And 3rd, do they generate system alerts in a way that's easy for your IT folks to recognize them and respond? So you need to think about those very clearly in addition to the actual capability of the software, because that's what will allow you to continuously monitor and maintain your cyber posture. And last but not least, and I mentioned many of these as I was going through those 17 domains or families to think about, in our business and with our customers in the defense sector, we know that there are 15 different tools that are required to address cybersecurity. I've listed them here, and I'm sorry, it looks like it's cut off, but we'll fix that when we send out the presentation here. But again, this is a robust list of software that if you're missing these, and depending on the vulnerabilities in your organization and where your critical data is, you may need to go out and evaluate as many as 15 different tools. So, with all of this, the framework, our best practices we've shared, I'll give you a 4 simple step process to think about, again, getting started. Number 1, prepare. So again, this starts by establishing an organizational committee or council for cybersecurity with executive leadership, focusing in and determining what level of cybersecurity is required and what framework might best address your needs, establishing your organizational baseline of expected network behavior, which we'll share with you a little bit more about in a moment. And again, consider your expertise that you have in-house, not only to get you to a secure environment, but to maintain it. Second, we recommend, obviously, a significant planning phase. So again, with that framework in mind, whatever one you've selected, reviewing your existing policies and procedures against that framework, reviewing your IT infrastructure and tools that might be necessary. This is all within the mind of that risk-based approach. And clearly out of that, you'd want to document the gaps, whether it's policy-related, people-related, maybe you need to go hire somebody in a new role. But then build and plan to fill those gaps and create a budget and timeline. Again, we recognize that every business probably can't get there overnight. So again, thinking about how you can kind of take a bite at the elephant one chunk at a time. And then begin protecting the organization. So again, whatever those policies are that need to be updated or developed, getting that work done, planning for, developing, testing, implementing the various IT systems, configurations, hardware, software, and IT tools. And don't forget that ongoing employee training. And then finally, we recommend, again, this is not something you can just put in place once and expect to run and continue to protect your organization. We all know you can't just install an IT tool and know that it will run forever. So establish regular meetings of this security council or group you put together. Review the metrics you've developed and ask yourself the tough questions. Make sure you monitor and remediate any issues as they come up. Audit yourself. We recommend, again, considering a third-party audit to address any industry-specific requirements at least annually, as well as at least an annual audit of every single policy to ensure that it doesn't need to be updated and that you're following it correctly. So with that in mind, I want to talk about how can you get a real baseline sense of where your network is today and what work might need to be done. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob to walk you through our baseline network scan services. Bob?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. So establishing a baseline. We've seen a lot of comments in the chat that this is great information, but that it's a lot and it can be quite scary. But one of the things that we do to work with our clients is to do a network scan. It is a great first step in helping you establish the baseline from which you would need to build your cybersecurity plan. And what it is, it's non-intrusive discovery and documentation of your current state. We use a third-party tool that collects information about your network, but does not take any data or information from your network. It gives us a lot of different data points to analyze in which we can point out normally hard to detect or issues that just go by the wayside and aren't necessarily monitored every day from a high level. From there, we can then work with you to provide customized recommendations for remediation. It's really a useful tool to understand where you might have exposure now and what you need to do to mitigate that risk moving forward. It can be done remotely. No one needs to come on site. It takes about 20 minutes to set up, and then it usually runs in the background for about an hour, and then all the reports are generated. We're going to show you a little sample of the analysis it provides on these next few slides. So if you look here at company XYZ, whose name has been protected for the Witness Protection Program, it breaks down literally about a couple hundred pages of data and information into a very simple analysis and a report, which our network services and security team goes through and categorizes in a red, yellow, green format. Green obviously being this is compliant, everything looks good. Yellow, we would recommend that an action plan be put together. Maybe not an issue that needs immediate remediation, but something to think about in the next 1 to 2 years. And then red, these are vulnerabilities that we see right now that we would recommend working together to address. So it breaks it down first with servers. Takes a look at your servers, what you're running, how and when the support for that could expire. This particular example has a 2012 standard, which means they're nearing the end of support cycle in 1 to 2 years. We would recommend working together to figure out a plan to replace that. We look at IT and the support in a strategic sense and not a reactive sense. So you want to know when you have these hardware expenses that are coming up to be able to budget for them and plan accordingly while not compromising security. Some of the other aspects of the server, warranty status, and the updates are of critical importance and that we would point out as immediate risks that need to be addressed. You can see on the patch status, there's 32 updates. As Elizabeth referenced earlier, upgrades are optional, but updates are not. They truly present a risk to your entire organization. We then take a look at the workstations, both what we see in terms of account as well as which type. You see we flagged some Windows 7 workstations. These are outside of their support and therefore could be more vulnerable to hacks. We would recommend discussing why they may be needed. It could be that they're supporting a particular program or software that you run, and how we can best secure them or replace them in a manner that doesn't put you at further risk. We also look at the number of users, administrators, and total computers that you have. We identify anything that might look off. For example, if there's a high number of inactive users related to the active users, could there be off-boarded employees that have not yet been removed from the system that a hacker could then gain access and use to get into your network and access your protected information? Lastly, we also take a look at your core applications and would recommend any improvements or questions to flag so everyone has a good, firm understanding of what is needed and how to move it forward. Looking at the infrastructure, second bucket down, you'll see that there was no backup detected. As Elizabeth referenced on a previous slide, this is a critical security risk. Should something happen, the ability to get back up and get back up quickly in a manner that does not disrupt your business, your employees, and your revenue, and your customers, this particular business would be at a great risk for exposure. So that would be an immediate concern we would address and try to figure out what's going on and what we need to do moving forward. We also look at the data utilization. Right now, there's less than 5% free space. That also poses a risk should something happen. But this organization would need a plan moving forward to protect their existing data, make sure they have enough space in order to maintain it, and then back it up. And finally, we take a look at the passwords. And we really look at this with respect to how they're set up, what controls are in place, and is there potential exposure. Well, you can see here that all passwords are set to never expire, and there's really no complexity enabled. That's obviously not a best practice for anyone's passwords and something that can usually be remediated and addressed pretty quickly with some group policy. We also see a high number of failed logon attempts. Now, this could be evidence of just something that was on auto, try to log in and things like that, and it's a non-issue. But anytime we see something that abnormally high, again, with respect to the number of employees and users in this company, we flag it for discussion because it could be indicative of a hacker trying to gain access. Lastly, believe it or not, we do take a look at if any passwords have been exposed and are available for sale on the dark web. More often than not, there are some. And again, these can come from a variety of different breaches, perhaps not even from your organization, but if you use a frequent email address and password combination, that information, should it be captured in another breach, can be for sale out on the dark web. The risk there, of course, is if a hacker or an adverse actor gets that information, they could then use it to access your company's network. So this is usually an eye-opening experience when we review this with a prospective client or an existing client, and especially when you see the CEO's email and password up there available for sale. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just something, hold on. There we go, sorry.
So lastly, we condense all of that down into an overall risk summary. I won't read you every word on the page, but we highlight the key risks. You saw the server, the domain controller, warranty expired, nearing end of life, patches that are needed, the outdated Windows 7 computers, no business class antivirus software, lack of consistent patching, lack of data backup. These are things that we would lay out for you in this manner and then help you start to build a plan as to what is needed and when. I don't believe that it has been mentioned yet, but we should add that as an attendee of Enterprise University, SSE is offering everyone who has attended this course, if you would like to have a complimentary network scan done for your organization, please contact us via our website or from my email at the end of this presentation. Back over to you, Elizabeth.
All right, great. Thank you, Bob. A great way for a company to get started. They'll know immediately where their vulnerabilities lie. So now to wrap it up so we can get to the question and answers, I think the big takeaway that I want every company to understand is that not only are cyber attacks increasing, but the emergence of new technologies like 5G networks, artificial intelligence, machine learning, these are all things that we can use to defend ourselves against the hackers. But we also need to make sure that we recognize that the hackers are using these same advances in technology to further their attack with increasing sophistication against every company. It's a two-way street. So as technology continues to evolve, so must we, so must our policies, our procedures, how we think about cybersecurity. So this is not a moment in time again. What we taught you today will continue to evolve. We all need to stay ever vigilant. And we hope that that's one of the key messages that you got from today. We want to provide you a list of resources. So again, staying alert of emerging cybersecurity threats is clearly key. That situational awareness. We have links to several sites where you can get up-to-the-date information. If you're looking for particular frameworks or guides, as I mentioned, you don't need to start from scratch. We've listed websites where you can go and have access to various different frameworks. And of course, free training. So if all else fails, and we religiously as a company force our employees to go through this cyber training provided on cyber.mil, excellent training, and we highly recommend that you consider this as a source. And so finally, our key takeaways. If I said it once, I know Bob said it, upgrades are optional, but updates are not. And again, consider the threat that your employees bring to your organization. They are your first line of defense. Make sure you're training them. Get leadership involved in building out your cybersecurity practices. Elevate the risk management discussion. Pick your framework, and remember to start building a plan. And it's critically important to think about the people, the process, and the technology. The one thing we can say again, and most importantly, is get started now. And as Bob mentioned, we'd be happy to help you get started with this complimentary network scan where you again saw very quickly you can wrap your arms around the vulnerabilities that may be present inside your company today. So with that in mind, I think, Bob, I want to turn it back over to you to walk through question and answer that either Charlie, Greg, or myself can answer.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, we have been monitoring the chat and answering some questions as they've come in, but there are a few for the group. The first one, and Charlie, I'm going to ask that you please take this one. How long does it take to build a cybersecurity plan if starting from scratch?
Oh, you gave me a good one. It really depends on the cybersecurity regulation you're trying to adhere to. So, for instance, if you're doing something as small as CMMC level 1, there's only, a handful of controls, 17, that you have to meet. But when we're talking about, NIST 801 or NIST 800-53 revision 5, the latest, you're talking 1,189 controls. So it really depends on the cybersecurity regulation you're trying to adhere to. Not only are you getting a security plan in place, you're getting policies created, procedures created. It can take a very long time, and I would think even for more of a standard type of compliance, maybe like the 800-171 where there's around 110 controls, you're probably looking at a 3-month engagement at minimum based on, an average size organization. If you've got multiple locations, thousands of users, obviously at that time it multiplies exponentially. So hopefully that answers the question. It was a loaded one.
Thank you, Charlie. Next question, Greg Thornton, I'm going to ask you to take this one on. How do you help a company if they've already been breached?
Well, we help them not get breached a second time is really the easiest way to say it. The level of exposure and corruption of data will really drive how we're able to assist. I hate to say that we've gained more than a few customers after they've been breached, and we were able to help them successfully get back in business and back to production. But it will really vary working through either their backups to find a good backup that is before the corruption, or working to eliminate the corrupt data and secure the environment itself, ensuring that the potential is not there for a re-breach. So if the malware still exists in the system, making sure that we scan it and remove it entirely. But really, proactive is the best bet. Get your system in order before you're breached. It's the age-old adage for motorcycle riders. There are two types. One, those that ride and have not fallen, and those that ride and have fallen. But you're going to be in the latter category at some point in time if you ride motorcycles. Road rash. But that is the truth of cybersecurity. There's lots you can do to mitigate the risk of exposure, and we'd be happy to help you walk through that more so than the remediation after breach.
Thank you, Greg. This next one came through via the chat, and Charlie already responded to it, but I do want to read it and share with the group because it just speaks to the breadth and the different types of cybersecurity attacks. But I read an article yesterday where hackers got access to a casino's database. They accessed the system via the thermometer in the fish tank in the casino, which was connected to the internet. They got data on the high rollers. Charlie, I think you spoke to this once regarding the Internet of Things, which Elizabeth also had as one of the major threats to watch for this year. But anything you'd like to add to that to share with the group as a whole?
No, I mean, you got to protect against those devices. I mean, you think about, okay, well, let's just go ahead and head them to the wireless network that we have at our location. Well, is that wireless network segregated from your corporate network? If you're using, logical separations, we call them VLANs. If you're using logical separations, make sure you have access lists in place that state traffic from this device can't access, on this network can't access devices on this network. So there are a lot of things that need to be done, but obviously stressing the fact that obviously in this case, those controls were not in place, and therefore that's why there was a breach.
Thank you, Charlie. The last question that came through a chat, and it came early, so we may have already answered this throughout the presentation, but I'm ready to get started. What should be my first step? Greg, do you want to answer that quickly?
Absolutely. The simple answer is give us a call. Let us know that you're interested. In fact, one of the participants has already reached out to us this morning, which is great. We would start by having a conversation about your environment, your scenario, what your systems are, what you do. Get to know your business operations a bit. We would, at the same time, perform the network scan that Bob had referenced. We could additionally do a readiness assessment, but really help walk you through those first steps of securing your network or enhancing the cybersecurity you've got in place. But the first step is give us a call or let us know.
Thank you, Greg. Elizabeth, back over to you.
Yeah, and I apologize. I didn't mean to throw up the thank you slide too quickly there, but what I wanted to do was to make sure that, Bob, they had your email address and direct dial there at the bottom of the slide. So I do think we're just a minute or two before 11:30, which was our wrap-up time. So I do want to thank Enterprise Bank. Gary, Stacy, thank you so much for inviting us to share what we've learned over many, many years today. Just the opportunity to partner with you in this delivery. We're eternally grateful and thankful. We'd love to be a resource to any organization that has joined the call today. any question that you have, we're happy to answer, and just want to share the what we've learned over all of these years and help you avoid mistakes that we may have made along the way. Again, Bob's contact information is here. Look forward to being a resource, and just want to thank you all again. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Stacy.
Elizabeth and team, thank you so much for presenting today. This has really been some great and terrifying information. I just want to remind everyone that the link for their website is in the chat, as well as the link for the Enterprise University survey. If you could take time to respond to that, we would appreciate it. If you have questions that you think of later, you can reach out to Enterprise University at enterprisebank.com, and we can put you in contact with the SSE team. If you need a certificate of attendance, you can also get that there. And with that, if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and close this out for today. All right. Looks like we're caught up. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.